The other day I was watching a video by the excellent Nerdarchy, and they were discussing how they used exotic weapons within 5th edition, and where they were really, where they'd gone missing from 3.5, which had a wealth of strange and, well, weapons of questionable realistic use. But they bring character to the game, so I actually really believe that there is a place for them, and I have ways in which I would introduce these weapons into my campaigns, and I thought I'd share this video just to basically explain how I think you could as well. So my actual aims here, I wanted to obviously provide weapons that actually came from the past editions. If you're looking for weapons of your own, I can't cover everything, then you can try and use some of these techniques to import them yourself. I chose the 3 that I thought had the most character and instantly brought ideas of how on earth they would be used within combat, or at least within sort of fantasy combat that we're used to in Dungeons and Dragons. Secondly, I really wanted to ensure that they felt unique from the standard weapons. 5e, for however much I like it, and this is actually in a way one of its strengths, but a lot of its weapons feel very homogenized. A lot of the weapons, the only difference really between them is whether you're doing bludgeoning or slashing. If we're looking at sort of maces, maws, longswords, all those sort of things, they all come basically down to relatively small differences that make very little difference. Within 5e it doesn't really make too much of a difference against most things you're fighting, whether you're doing bludgeoning or slashing. Even skeletons, it doesn't really make that definition, which is a bit sad, but so I really wanted in this to have a little bit more distinction between the weapons, something that made them feel different. I obviously also wanted to maintain balance. Balance is a hotly debated topic, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't feel like just, oh, I've got this ridiculous weapon, I can come in and just kill everything else whilst everyone else in my party is just left sitting in the dirt. So that was obviously a key part of this, but they should also obviously still have some use to them. As with anything, it is up to you or your dungeon master, if you are a player, as to how you implement these. I would suggest that the only way to get these weapons, or at least learn to use them with proficiency, is through taking feats and really specialising towards them with your character. These are weapons that somewhat define your character, I would say. If you came into a fight against a bunch of goblins and one of them was wielding a 2-bladed sword, you would instantly think that was a little bit different, and so I wanted it to really feel that when you chose these feats and when you chose these weapons, you got reward from it, but obviously within the degree of balance. So yes, if you or your dungeon master think that fighters in general know how to use these, go for it. I wouldn't myself. So we've got our first one, the 2-bladed sword. When Nerdarchy was talking about this, or at least brought up the screen graphic, it instantly caught my eye. I think it has a great history as a weapon. It's cool. Just instantly looking at it, even if you don't know any of the pop culture references, it's something that's a little bit more exciting than a standard sword. And obviously the first one that comes to everyone's mind is Darth Maul. There's probably others, and you probably also think of some bow-staff users when you look at this kind of weapon, but Darth Maul is probably the big idea. And we only ever really see him fighting once properly. I know there's that little scene in the desert, but we only ever see him fighting once, and that's the fight against Qui-Gon and Obi. So I wanted there to be a degree of having this weapon being influenced by that fight. So when we're looking at this, looking at the stats, it's just base weapon. This is without any of the feats or anything. We've got a cost of 30 gold pieces. It's a bit rare of a weapon. You're having to search someone out to make it for you. It does 1d8 slashing damage, so on par with sort of the longswords of the world, and it's 2-hand. So you're not getting that versatile feat, but I think that makes sense for this kind of weapon. Anyway, on to the actual sort of meat of this topic, the feats. So the main way I would do exotic weapons would be through taking feats to allow you to access some of the more intricate properties of these, already expressed through your character, but this is kind of your weapon. This is how you express yourself in combat. So when you actually look at the feat, you can see it has a requirement of 13 dexterity. This is a two-bladed sword master. It's a weapon that's a little bit cumbersome. It's very much a little bit risky. The first few times you're going to do it, you're not going to be wanting to swing it around wildly, because you've got to be careful. You've got to have a good self-awareness, that is, awareness of where your actual body parts is, otherwise you're going to end up chopping your foot off. So I think that dexterity requirement makes sense flavour-wise, and also makes sure that the character has to spread their stats out a little bit as well. So next, on to the actual stuff. When you take the attack action and attack with the two-bladed sword, you can take a bonus action to make a melee attack with the weapons of a blade. Again, D8. This is keeping it on par with sort of the dual longswords of the world. It makes sense with this kind of weapon. If I didn't have this, it would feel very strange. And I've decided to keep this only as part of the feat, so it's not a ridiculously strong sort of first few levels weapon, if you do happen to get hold of one, even though you probably don't have proficiency. But also, just so that when you first use it, if you haven't ever used this before, you're not going to be able to spin around and use the other blade as much. You probably are only going to use one side of it. So on discussion with that Darth Maul scene, we can see that I've gone with the idea of flanking not being so much of an issue for this character. If you're wielding one of these, you can point one of your blades at one enemy and another at the foe behind you, and you can use that to somewhat maintain distance from them and keep yourself safe. So you can use a bonus action, so you're choosing between using a bonus action for damage or for the safety to sort of defend yourself, and from then till the start of your next turn, the attackers no longer get advantage if they're flanking you. I know that's an optional rule, and so there's the suggestion +2 to AC if you don't run that rule, but I think that makes a lot of sense with this weapon. And then again, whilst wielding a two-bladed sword, your vertical and horizontal jump distance is increased by 5 feet, so you're using this to sort of propel yourself forward. You're getting that same sort of mobility that you kind of imagine of one of these fighters. They're generally quite strong but dexterous. They're certainly able to make their way around and use terrain to their advantage, so I really wanted to reflect that. On to the next weapon, we have the Meteor Hammer. Now again, there's a pop culture reference, and they reference this in their video as well, of the sort of Kill Bill girl that has the Meteor Hammer and just sort of goes to town with it a little bit. And I really wanted to implement that sort of idea. So this weapon is designed around the idea of creating space and having very much an obvious range of threat. An area where you're really good at fighting, and an area where you're... That is kind of the counterplay. You get this incredible reach for a melee weapon, but you're also not quite as good if someone actually manages to get close up to you. So cost of 20 gold pieces, again quite expensive for a weapon, but it's exotic. That makes sense. 1d8 bludgeoning damage. Some people would argue against that. I think potentially this could be a 1d6 and 1d8 coming with the feat, but 1d8 I think makes sense. Getting hit with one of these, especially going full speed, would hurt. Two-handed, you need two hands to wield one of these, that's obvious. So special, reach of 15 feet. So this is the longest ranged, effectively melee weapon. It really does straddle the line between melee and ranged, or melee and ranged, if you want to have that debate. Disadvantage on attacks made against creatures within 5 feet of you. So I think that makes sense. If someone gets up close to you, you're going to struggle maintaining that spin of the spin or arc of the orbit. The orbit of your Meteor Hammer, and actually be able to attack them. They're going to really be messing with you and cannot be used to make opportunity attacks. This thing is a tempo-based weapon. It's not used for reactions, and I think that makes sense. So you're getting this incredible reach with a few drawbacks. But anyway, so when you actually take the feat and you gain proficiency with it, what do you get? So again, exploring the ideas of this range of threat. On your turn, you can use the bonus action and begin spinning sort of Meteor Hammer around your head above you. I think if anyone thinks of this kind of weapon, that is what they're imagining in their head. So what this does is it sort of creates this arc, this ring around you, this 10-foot radius ring, that if a creature enters, they're going to potentially take a huge amount of damage. I've got the numbers there, dexterity saving throw and all that jazz, but it very much says that if someone wants to get up close to you, they've got to be willing to take a big chunk of damage. They can potentially look to dodge, which is why it's a dexterity saving throw, but it's sometimes it's possibly better in this to stay at a distance or look to use Misty Step or something else to get really close in. I've noted there that not within 5 feet of you, so once they do get in, again, this is less useful. The last little bit is just sort of to make sense of the idea of fighting within close quarters. You really do need some space here to use it, and you can't just stand on top of your allies. It's just going to get tangled all around them, so that last sentence is just to make sure that you can't do that. And once someone's close range with you, it really does muck up your fighting style. Anyway, that's how I would run the Meteor Hammer. On to the last one. We have the Punching Daggers or Spike Gauntlets. These are so classic, sort of over-the-top D&D, but they're useful in that they look like they actually could have some use. In foremost, it's a gauntlet or something that's got some daggers stuck to it, really. Now, as Nerdarchy was talking about, they said that these really fit in well with crit builds in 3.5, and I really wanted to take that in. And obviously, you get the idea of Wolverine, and without just making it overpowered, to get that feeling of Wolverine, I decided to really run home the crits. So what have we got? 20 gold piece each. So quite expensive, but once you're sort of level 4, it's not making too much of a difficulty. 1d4 slashing damage. You're thinking that's quite low. We'll get to it. It's low for a reason. Running the maths on it, it could be 1d6, but 1d4 for safety's sake. Light, this makes sense. You can have one in each hand. These are not heavy weapons. You might be thinking, but why aren't these finesse? These are not particularly heavy weapons. Surely there should be the option of using dexterity. If I was implementing these in my game, I would maybe make these finesse. But there's a bit of a awkward combination that comes up with rogues if we go finesse. We want to avoid this being the go-to. Every single rogue has to have this weapon. So that's one I want to avoid. Anyway, so onto the feat. Spiked Gauntlet Master. Proficiency with Spiked Gauntlets, or Punching Daggers, whatever you want to call them. Wolverine Claws even. That's needed. So Spiked Gauntlets seem inconvenient at first, but over time you kind of get used to them, which gives you the advantage over other weapons of being able to somewhat still use your hands. You've obviously got disadvantage if you're trying to write or pick flowers for people. That's not going to go off very well. But you can open doors, you can pick up other things, you can potentially even cast spells, as I've written here. So that is a huge advantage coming straight from that. Obviously it depends on the campaign and how much you use grappling and spellcasting and what kind of character you're going for. But that could be either a nice flavour feature or potentially quite strong in other hands. Now onto the one that's probably questionable. Whenever you score a critical hit on an attack made with your core gauntlets, you treat the damage dice of this weapon as a d12. So they're just as base. You're attacking normally, you get a few hits, each of them is a d4. You crit, suddenly doing 2d12 plus strength in terms of damage, which is a huge burst. You're getting this massive sort of Wolverine style, basically bearing down on your opponents. But it's balanced out by the d4. Running the numbers, it actually turns out to be, for a 5th level fighter, roughly equal in terms of damage, with a person wielding a champion fighter, dual wielding longswords if they've taken that feat. So, and it scales up roughly evenly as you go up the levels depending on your build. Obviously we're going for a critical build, so it's not going to be as good if you're going for some kind of really strange, I don't know, you're going for the Spike Gauntlets, the Blade Singer. It's not going to work quite as well that, but even then you've got the ability to use your hands for somatic components, so they come in quite nicely with that. I think these make for a really great weapon. They have a huge amount of flavour in just that burst of damage without being actually overpowered in a sort of statistical sense. So I really like that. Anyway, this is how I would implement these exotic weapons into my game, and I really hope that you've found it useful. Cheers.